Everybody, Chris Webster here to talk about one of the latest supporters to the Archaeology Podcast Network, The Motley Fool. Now, I've been investing in the stock market through various applications for a few years now, and everybody who's listening to this can benefit from that sort of investment for the long-term financial planning. And also, I know the hosts of these podcasts can benefit because as archaeologists, like none of us get retirement. We all have to kind of fend for ourselves. So investing in the stock market is a good idea, but not everybody can do it. And look, we get it. The market is complicated and confusing, and to many of us, it simply doesn't make sense. In fact, where do you even start? Take all of the guesswork out of it with the Motley Fool Stock Advisor. The Motley Fool has been around for over 25 years and has been spot on in recommending some of the world's most important companies before they hit the big time. I'm talking about Amazon, Tesla, Netflix, Starbucks, all before they exploded in value. With their easy to use and super informative service, Stock Advisor, you could join the ranks before they potentially find the next big thing. After all, their average stock recommendation is up over 400% as of April 10th, 2023. And no need to be intimidated by financial jargon or market complexities. As the name suggests, these guys don't take themselves too seriously. Now, finances, that's a different story. Their friendly and relaxed approach has helped over 700,000 people move closer to financial independence, all while beating the market and having fun. New members can access Stock Advisor for only $89 for their first year, a full $110 off the full list price. Don't sit on the sidelines and think about what could have happened. Visit fool.com/APN to start your investing journey today. That's $110 discount off of $199 per year list price. Membership will renew annually at the then current list price. So again, check the link in the show notes of this episode.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 202. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, who's finally back, Paul Zimmerman. Today we talk about all the tech that Paul's used in the last 2 months in Saudi Arabia. Let's get to it. Welcome to the show, everybody. Paul, long time no podcast. How's it going?
Yeah, no kidding. I'm doing pretty good. I feel bad. I mean, when I took off for this last trip, I thought that I was going to be able to record because, you know, we normally record on Thursday evenings, which is Friday, very early morning, late night when I'm in the Middle East. Yeah. And I can wake up, record for a couple hours and then go back to sleep. And I thought I was going to be able to do that. And out of 2 months, I got to do that once. So, here I go, continue my track record of being the world's worst podcast co-host ever. But that was a fun recording, actually, that one that we did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. You are, I wouldn't say the worst. You're
just one of.
Just one of. Yeah, no, it's the exact opposite. You're out there, boots on the ground, gathering content. That's what you're doing. So, it's great. I love it. I mean, you're gathering a lot more content than I am, to be honest with you. So there you go.
Yeah, I got into this podcast way back when to keep myself one toe in the field in archaeology, and I'd always considered myself a field archaeologist, not necessarily a very good one, but one that somebody who really enjoyed it. And the way things have developed over the last few years, this has been, not just a lifeline to keep me in the field, but now that I am back, fully fledged in the field, it's great because I have these opportunities with you to kind of reflect on what I'm doing and to talk to other people that are doing other interesting things. And then sometimes I can take some of the work I do and, have side discussions with them about the work that they do. Life's kind of serendipitous, right? And so it's worked its way back into my life in a really interesting way. And because of the podcast, that's a big part of it.
Well, that's awesome. And it's awesome to see how things have progressed, since you joined the show. And I don't know, did you have a chance to hear episode 200? I don't know how much chance you had to listen to podcasts.
I didn't have a whole lot of chance to listen to that. I think I probably listened to that episode on my flight back home. But yes, I did listen to it. I always make it a point to listen to all our podcasts and to try to use it to improve. And, maybe slowly, itsy bitsy bits at a time I have. But nice. That was fun.
Well, exactly. For anybody that didn't hear that, it was a really fun one. And I'm only mentioning it because you're talking about, when you joined the podcast, and I had to look back at it. It was episode 61. So in the context of 202 episodes, which is what this recording is, that's a lot. I mean, you've been here for, obviously longer than any other co-host by far. So That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, I wonder if that counts when you count the time that I'm not here.
I mean, in that amount of episodes, it is still not very many times. So,
okay.
Although it's been more in the last couple of years.
Well, yeah, like I said, I'm back in the field, literally,
exactly.
and the field writ large. But I'm out of commission, half of last year and a couple months already of this year.
Well, along those lines, then let's talk about where you've been the last couple of months. I mean, we kind of led up to it before you left, and just chatted about what you guys are going to be doing a little bit. But you were in Saudi Arabia. Tell us what brought you there.
Right. So any long-term listeners will remember that I was in Saudi last summer as well. I was working for an American CRM company that was doing some work there. The company has more projects and has expanded their presence in the country. So they brought me out again. And this time I was working on a series of different projects that the company I'm working for was hired by a group called the Royal Commission for Al Ula, which is a fantastic city in north of Medina, a ways. And like I mentioned on the last recording that I was actually on, there's a ton of archaeology in the area. There's the major site of Dedan. There's the site of Hegra. Those are two of the things that, if you don't know anything else about Saudi archaeology, you may have heard of one or both of those.
Wow.
So because this is contract archaeology, I'm not at liberty in the same way I am when I talk about the work that I do in Lagash, which is an academic project, at the same kind of liberty to talk exactly about what I'm doing. But I did a lot of interesting work with a lot of interesting people who were very good at the work that they did. And we used a bunch of tech, some of it old, some of it new to me, that I think, we might have an episode here just talking about the different kinds of tech that I was using and some of the opinions and some of the experiences that I formed from it.
Nice. Well, I'm looking forward to that. We've got a whole bunch of things that you wrote down here that we can talk about. So it'll be interesting to talk about it. Hey, first, before we get there, you've got photogrammetry on the list here. And I just got to ask, did you see, because we talked about this on the Archaeology show that came out yesterday as we're recording this. I can't remember what episode number it was, but either way, we talked about the brand new scans that were released of the Titanic. Have you seen that?
Oh, I didn't dig into any of the news articles, but on my news feed, I saw some of those, and those are pretty spectacular and so eerie.
Right. Yeah. It's really cool. You get a chance to take a closer look at it. What I really like is really what you can tell from that. And from an archaeological standpoint, it's interesting to note these things, because sometimes we think of photogrammetry as just, well, I want to essentially grab this object and pull it into virtual space for, measurements and other stuff like that. But you might be able to see things, especially something like this that's underwater, very murky. It's 12,500 feet down underwater. There's literally no light down there unless you bring it, right? You can't see the whole thing all at once. You just can't light it that much. It's too big. But when you see it like this, the thing that struck me was how the bow plowed into the ground. I mean, it looks like a meteor crater with the dirt piled up around the bow. And it's still like that. It hasn't, through ocean currents or whatever, it hasn't flattened itself back out or anything like that from that disturbance in over 100 years. And it was amazing to me. And also the other thing is amazing to me is how intact the center section is. Probably not internally, but externally, the whole center section, from where it busted off the stern and where the bow broke, but it's still kind of attached. It looks like you could float that to the surface and attach a bow and a stern and sail it off. It doesn't look too bad.
Yeah, that's the photo that I was thinking of in particular. And the front end, the bow and the stern are totally destroyed, flattened practically, and the right. Smokestacks are gone. But that middle section does look like you could probably just go for a stroll up and down the hallways. Probably not, but that's what it looks like from the outside.
Right. Yeah. Could you imagine some higher technology years from now where somebody just turns that into a hotel at the bottom of the sea, that whole center section, just like,
that's
you go down there and maybe not. It is pretty much a graveyard. So there might be some regulation against that. So anyway, speaking of locating things, one of the first things on your list here is mobile GIS. Let's talk about that.
Right. On my list of topics, things I could discuss today, I kind of broke it down into data collection, data processing, and data storage. And, most of what I do when I'm on a job like this, I'm a field tech. So I am primarily concerned with data collection. And so mobile GIS, we've discussed plenty of times. I discussed and have written an article that's in review right now about using mobile GIS at Lagash for a surface survey. And we've used a whole bunch of different kinds. What we use on this project is we use a product called ICMT GIS. And yeah, this is a weird one. I've definitely used ones that seem much more modern. This one, it does everything we need to, but it has a lot of things that as you use it, you learn not to do because it'll crash the program. It's really funny looking in that it looks like it's ported from Windows 95, and I think it probably was. and I'm not being facetious. I really think it kind of was. And there are a lot of things that you just can't do. You know, certain gestures that you're used to, like on your iPad, won't work. Copy and paste into the fields doesn't work.
Right.
And it's not, you know, I'm not here to rag on this program in particular, though I happily will. But what I did enjoy, and this is what I want to talk about more, was I learned two things that really stuck out at me. One of them was with this one in particular, when you go to create a new feature, it pops up a box, asks you how you want to record it, what the layer is. And the terminology isn't always the same between different parts of the programs, between features and layers and so on. And so that's a little confusing. It also gives you an ID that you can edit. And what we found out last summer, if you edit that ID and you give it the same ID as an existing object, it crashes the entire program because that ID is an internal ID for the program itself. And so I was thinking about that just as a general point of programming. And I realized this in writing my own total station software. You don't have to present everything to the end user, right? There's no need to present that internal ID to the end user. If they mess with it, they potentially mess with the data. There's no good reason for it. And that's the same thing I found with my own programming was I was doing things like my initial messages when you would save some data, it said, yes, this point was successfully saved to the blah, blah, blah database backend. I'm like, well, no, who cares? The end user does not care what database, you know, that I'm using SQLite and that I saved it successfully to the SQLite database. What they care about is, yes, I saved the data.
Yeah, you know? I literally need a check mark. That's all I need.
Yes, that's all. It's saved. Go Done. You, right? Done. Yeah. And so this is just kind of a more of a call then to programmers is realize who your target audience is. And even though when you're doing your programming, it's very tempting to give lots of detail, a lot of the times that detail is meaningless to the person that's actually using it, or in the case of what we saw with this ID, this internal ID in this program, is dangerous to the end user.
Yeah.
The other thing that I really did like, though, is that we used it last summer and then again this summer for mapping, right? So you'd go and you could trace the outline of a site, or you could trace the outline of features on sites, or drop points on individual small features and so on. Part of our group was collecting with paper, and somewhere in the specs it said that we would provide RCU a paper sketch map of each site. Okay. And I thought how silly that is that we could give them a very accurate map done in the GIS, save it as a, do a screen cap, save that to the camera roll on the iPad, and then annotate it there and hand them, if it has to be on paper, print that out and hand them that. But then you'd have the advantages of both. You'd have the stuff that you really have a hard time doing in a GIS, indicating, something that's off screen, like, next site over is 200 meters that direction, something like that you would really easily do on a paper map that you're annotating by hand. But with those paper maps, you lose the accuracy. Things aren't in proportion. Things are a little off of where they actually are. North isn't necessarily exactly north. All those little things that irk me. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking that whether you're using this or any other thing, that you could actually combine those two kinds of modes of collecting data.
Well, okay. So when you said some of the team was collecting on paper, do you mean were they for the mapping? Were they literally like compass and paste mapping, or were they taking a printout of a GIS map and annotating it like you said, or literally just sketching out the whole site?
Literally just sketching out. They had paper forms that we I'm trying to be nice. It was driving me kind of crazy, but because it was said in the specs to RCU that we would give them paper sketch maps, it was taken to be literally paper from start to end.
Wow.
Yeah. And so paper. I was a little bothered by that.
Yeah, that seems a little
but
much.
I think that, again, they're really, it does seem a little much, but they're very experienced archaeologists. They're very good at what they do. And I think that I can present them next time I go back, which I may or may not do. But if I go back, I can present to them what I think is a smarter workflow that won't slow them down at all, still allows them to present something on paper to the client at the end, but then brings in the stuff that I care about, accuracy and the data collection with the GIS.
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love compass and paste maps, sketch maps. I really had a good time making those when I used to do that. And I haven't done one in probably 8 or 9 years. I mean, it's been a long time, maybe even 10 years, because it's been all GIS, from this point out. And when the BLM Nevada, I can't remember when it was, when they actually stopped pretty much requiring those, and you could just turn in a GIS sketch map. Then everybody started doing that. But compass and paste maps are so fun to do. And even if you're not an artist, it allows you to kind of feel like an artist, so to speak.
There is real value to it, and especially in the ways that you can annotate and the ways that you can indicate things like slope that are much harder to do if you're just doing a top-down, very clinical, dry sort of GIS tracing things map.
Right.
So I think that there is room to grow there, and I think that this is one of the things I've really been enjoying about doing the field work is that in my mind I have a notion of what might be the best, but
yeah.
When the rubber hits the road, in reality, you find that there are actually a few different bests, and maybe there's a good way to combine them into making the super best.
Okay, then. So, given the language and the scope of work, what were you using for photography? I'm just curious.
So we were using a combination. We were using iPads and we were using DSLRs. And what I've come to decide is that iPads or Android tablets, it doesn't have to be iPads, it's just that I've been using iPads exclusively for the last couple of years. iPad mini 6s, which I think are phenomenal. The cameras on these are not as good as a DSLR, but if you're carrying this piece of equipment, the tablet, out into the field anyhow, and you've got a camera that is really, really good, might as well use it and prioritize that. I would still use DSLRs for certain sorts of things, right? So if I'm doing really carefully composed art photos, if I'm doing really carefully composed object photos, I definitely would use the DSLRs because I can control things like depth of field that I can't with a tablet or a phone camera. But for almost everything else, the iPads have it, and they have that built-in GPS, which is so helpful when it comes time to figure out, what photograph was where. They'll even tell you which direction you were facing. And that's encoded there in the EXIF data. So, that's all so useful, so helpful that I think that it really trumps the perceived advantage of a DSLR in most cases.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And the photography off the mobile device is getting better and better. I'm actually rocking an iPhone 12 still, and the 15, I think, is coming out this September. Yep. We're going to transition at this time. The 13 wasn't enough for me to switch. And then the 14, it was kind of an off year, that there wasn't many advances either from that one. So I was like, we're going to wait. So it's the longest I've gone without switching out my iPhone, I think, since the iPhone came out. But the point is, I think the last model or the one before that does have depth of field and other things that you can even do in post, right? So you can select on a different focal point and do some of that stuff. And it's just getting better and better and better. So I think the days of the DSLR are kind of numbered.
Yeah, I mean, depth of field, that my understanding is it's software. It's not really the...
That's true.
I mean, they do have multiple lenses, so there's a little bit that can be affected that way. But whenever I'm on a Zoom call, people comment on how good my image looks. Not me, but
it is good.
The image.
No, it is good.
And that's because I'm using a real camera with a real lens. And I've got the aperture all the way wide open. So the depth of field is really narrow, just on, the tip of my nose to the back of my head, that much movement, and I'll go out of focus. It does make a difference. That versus the fake blurring the background, which just doesn't look quite as tasty,
Yeah, indeed.
But again, if you're bringing that iPad into the field and you're using it for your data collection, I'm really having a hard time at this point to understand why you would also need a DSLR.
Yeah, good point. Well, We could go on this for a long time. We've had whole episodes on cameras before too. So,
oh yeah, and I love them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, well, let's go ahead and take a break because we got a lot more to talk about, and we'll do that on the other side. Back in a minute. Hey, everybody. Chris Webster here to talk about one of the latest supporters to the Archaeology Podcast Network, The Motley Fool. Now, I've been investing in the stock market through various applications for a few years now, and everybody who's listening to this can benefit from that sort of investment for the long-term financial planning. And also, I know the hosts of these podcasts can benefit because as archaeologists, like none of us get retirement. We all have to kind of fend for ourselves. So investing in the stock market is a good idea, but not everybody can do it. And look, we get it. The market is complicated and confusing, and to many of us, it simply doesn't make sense. In fact, where do you even start? Take all of the guesswork out of it with the Motley Fool Stock Advisor. The Motley Fool has been around for over 25 years and has been spot on in recommending some of the world's most important companies before they hit the big time. I'm talking about Amazon, Tesla, Netflix, Starbucks, all before they exploded in value. With their easy to use and super informative service, Stock Advisor, you could join the ranks before they potentially find the next big thing. After all, their average stock recommendation is up over 400% as of April 10th, 2023. And no need to be intimidated by financial jargon or market complexities. As the name suggests, these guys don't take themselves too seriously. Now, finances, that's a different story. Their friendly and relaxed approach has helped over 700,000 people move closer to financial independence, all while beating the market and having fun. New members can access Stock Advisor for only $89 for their first year, a full $110 off the full list price. Don't sit on the sidelines and think about what could have happened. Visit fool.com/APN to start your investing journey today. That's $110 discount off of $199 per year list price. Membership will renew annually at the then current list price. So again, check the link in the show notes of this episode.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Welcome back to episode 202 of the ArchaeoTech podcast, and we're talking about Paul's trip to Saudi Arabia for the last couple of months, where he's been doing some work over there, and all the tech that he got to use while he was there. So let's switch over to GNSS. You mentioned that you were using a Leica GNSS receiver on this project. Let's hear about that.
Yeah, so I don't have a whole lot to report on that. Any of us who've used GNSS receivers now with the corrections, there's differences in interface, there's certain differences in capabilities, but the Leica system we used was pretty good for us. I had two different projects I worked on that were in the same abandoned, started hundreds of years ago, abandoned in the 1980s village. And we laid down a few control points at one end of the village. And then later for a separate project, we laid down some more control points using that GNSS, and everything matched up, which was really nice. Yeah.
Nice.
So that was using Leica's own satellites, which are, in geosynchronous orbit around the, or synchronous, stationary, I can't remember now.
I think it's
they're in orbit
around
the equator. So it's reliant to a certain extent on having a clear view to the south, which is problematic sometimes in Saudi because it's so mountainous, right? And lots of cliffs and things that will get in the way. But fortunately it didn't. And we had these two different sets of surveying control points that we then based off our other points off of, and everything lined up really nicely between them. And so that was just nice to see. I like that. This kind of high precision GNSS with the corrections is ubiquitous now. There's so many different products that you can get that'll do the same thing. They all work very similarly, and it's, a great general purpose tool. Now, the reason why I'm leading off with that is that, me, I'm a total station nerd. And what we matched up based off of those initial control points were points that we shot with total stations. So I was really in my element there.
There you go. Again, we don't want to get into the specifics of the project, but just from a technical standpoint, I just kind of assumed you were doing survey and stuff out there. Were you guys doing excavation? Because with total station would imply yes.
Yeah. So I was initially brought out to do landscape surveying, survey, right? Pedestrian survey, vehicle travel survey, whatever. But there are a bunch of ongoing projects. So I was doing some excavation. I was monitoring burial excavations. We were, that village that we're talking about, we were monitoring the clearance of the the buildings themselves and some of the, so that they could be consolidated and reconstructed for tourism, basically.
Sure.
So the total stations, what they have and what I've been saying, we're not going to get rid of them anytime soon, because what they have versus the GNSS receivers is that they work when you don't have a clear view of the sky.
Right.
Yes, you do have problems of, visibility. You've got to be able to see that prism if you're going to shoot it. But we would lay our control points with the GNSS receivers, then set up our total station and lay all our subdatums from those, and it worked great. And I think that's for the foreseeable future, that's going to be what everybody's doing. And that is what everybody's doing. I'm not breaking any new ground here, but in concert, the total stations and GNSS receivers make such a good package.
Yeah.
But you can't get rid of one or the other and still expect anything nearly the same quality. I mean, it's really the sum is the whole is more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah. I mean, the total station's only as good as the point it's sitting in space, right? If that point's garbage, then it doesn't matter what else you recorded. Yeah.
Right. With that village, one of the things we had to do was actually also with the burials I was talking about, we had to do photogrammetry, and we wanted the photogrammetry all to be very tightly spatially referenced to the world. And so that's, having that combination really helped. Other thing that was interesting, we were using a much older Leica total station, and a few things like it had a laser plummet, which I always thought was kind of cool. I've never actually used one before. I've only ever used optical plummets.
Yeah, they're fun.
If you're setting up indoors, great. If you're setting up in the bright Saudi sun, forget it. You can't see that point at all. You may or may not be over the control point. Yeah, we're all huddle around the tripod and try to you get your hand right underneath the tripod where you can see the dot in the palm of your hand and try to slowly bring it all the way down to the ground to see if you can get to the point. This was actually a little triumph of mine, was that it records the data, saves it locally, but there was no way of exporting the data. What I found out was that this older total station has formatting files, and you can upload a formatting file that then you translate your data through on export. You say, export, this job, run it through this formatting file, and you get it out in whatever format you tell it to do. Okay. So I found some formatting files online, and I tried to, hack them, and I ended up erasing some jobs. Fortunately, old jobs didn't matter without actually successfully getting the data. In the end, I found the name of the program, and it's a program that's been abandoned for 15 years.
Jeez.
That Leica had once put out. It barely ran on Windows, just barely. And most of what I tried to do with it would crash. But fortunately, the part of this program that generated those formatting files still ran. So I got a formatting file output that I could then export all my data as a CSV and then import into GIS, imported into Metashape for our control points for photogrammetry, and so that was a little triumph. And that was just me being my tenacious self when it comes to, getting data off of equipment by any means necessary. And that worked. So using the GNSS receivers to get our really tightly controlled control points, and then working off of that with the total station was really good. And then I also, because I got to play with the total station a lot, I trained a couple of my coworkers on how to use that one. And we came up with a plan for how to lay the hundreds of points that we'd need for the photogrammetry inside that village. Oh, yeah. And it worked really well. And it was a lot of fun. It was, I got to put on my educator hat with that, and they were great guys. They're really smart, really talented, but they didn't know that particular total station. Well, I didn't either, but at least I knew enough that I could wing it.
I think it's incredibly important anytime you have a total station on site, because I mean, to be honest, you just don't see them very often, right? Anytime you do have one on site, hopefully somebody knows how to run it. I think I've told this story before, but hopefully somebody knows how to run it. But if you do, don't just hog the total station, right? It's fun once you get doing it. I mean, it can be tedious a little bit if you're doing it all day, every day for weeks and weeks at a time, but bring other people in and teach them and spread that knowledge out. I'm really glad you did that. So you end up having one on site and nobody knows how to use it. And that's what happened to me. Shoot, probably back in 2009, I think it was right before I went to grad school. And there was a total station on site. Literally nobody there knew how to use it. And come to find out, we were like 2 weeks into a full scale block excavation and hadn't taken any points. Come to find out, the project manager didn't know how to set up the total station. Like, she had no idea. The field director, I guess, she had no idea how to do it. So I was like, can I just take this home for the weekend? And I YouTubed and looked up manuals, and because I'd used a total station before. This was a Leica, actually, and I'd used a Topcon before. I'd never used a Leica. So I understood the basic principles of it, but I still had like no idea. And by the end of the weekend, I had mapped my parents' like backyard and their deck and everything, because that's where we were staying. Yeah, I figured it out. And then I became like the total station person for like the next month that we were there. So yeah, but it's always nice to spread that knowledge out a little bit of any technology, really. It's better more people know it than less. So.
Yeah, and the total station, and you hinted at it right there, is that the principles are exactly the same. Geometry does not change between that Leica and that Topcon.
Right.
The Sakia's trigonometry is exactly the same that the Nikon's trigonometry is. How they label things, how they name things, what menus you have to go through, that's what changes from one to another. Sure. And if you teach somebody the principles that are going to apply to any total station, regardless of brand, then it just becomes a matter of figuring out how to negotiate the interface on that particular total station that you have on site. And so that's really what I like to focus on. I mean, back in Lagash, there was a young man that was from the village that did some work for us around the house, but he wanted to become an engineer. And so he saw me with the total station. He said, "You're going to teach me how to use the total station." So I every day would spend a couple hours with him, showing him how to set it up and take points. And he kept on saying, "Oh, but I want to learn the software." I was like, "Hey, it doesn't matter. The program is going to be different,
sure,
on whatever they have on the thing. But if you understand these principles, and you can set it up quickly and efficiently and consistently, you'll be fine. You'll learn the software that they have on that project that you're working on." So he took that seriously. And then a few weeks after I left Iraq last winter, he sent me a text saying, "Hey," and it was a picture of himself wearing a white hard hat because he landed that engineering job that he wanted. And I was so proud for that. But okay, so a little bit of brag here, but mostly it's about the importance of teaching people this stuff. You became the total station guy, and I don't mind being the total station guy in a project, but having one person that gets tied up with that one piece of equipment, if you have a sick day, if for whatever reason you leave the site early, everybody else is in trouble. It really helps every project to spread that knowledge around as widely as possible. And then it totally demystifies it. The only mysterious bit is, how do I get through the Sokia's operating system? Because it's really kind of weird. And it's based off of decisions that were made, 30 years ago and haven't changed, even though the hardware platforms could take the changes.
Yeah. It always goes back to one thing I've really taken from my time in the Navy, because you're always, looking at your next rank and your next advancement, right? And they don't say, don't do that, focus on that, because it makes you just a better, whatever you do, it makes you better at that job by focusing on the next thing up, because it's usually more advanced and there's more you have to learn. But the common concept was train your replacement. Whatever you're doing, wherever you're at, train your replacement. And by training your replacement, you not only allow, the Navy in this case, the ability to promote you because somebody's going to slide into your spot, but then you're also learning more about what you want to know by training somebody else, and it's just a good thing. And I've kind of done that with everything I've tried to do, is train your replacement, and don't have a big ego over it, thinking I'm the only one that should know how to do this. You know what I mean? There's always plenty of stuff to do. So
no, and it's an old adage, but if you really want to learn something, you teach it.
Yeah, for sure.
And that definitely applies for this. And then if you just make that your challenge, I'm going to learn this well enough to teach it, and you start to teach it, then you find out that you learn more about it. And as you're teaching it, invariably somebody's going to say, "How come you didn't do it this way?" Or why's that? And it might be because it was a blind spot and you just didn't think of it, or there might be some very valid reason why you didn't do it this way. And then you can use that to further enhance their understanding of it.
Right.
And so it's always fun.
Exactly. All right. Well, before we go to our next break, let's talk about laser scanners. You've got that down here. And you've got actually a number of really advanced scanning techniques down here for this one project. It sounds like it's pretty impressive, the amount of gear they took out there to do this. But let's talk about the laser scanners before we talk about the other stuff. Right.
So the laser scanners, this is something that I've seen and heard about for a long time and never got the chance to play with. And I was very lucky that on this village documentation project, that was one of the deliverables that was promised, was laser scans of the buildings. So after they had been cleared out, we went back through the laser scanner that we had was this handheld thing. So you've seen laser scanners sometimes mounted on a tripod, a static thing. These ones were a handheld one that you could walk around and do the insides of rooms and do multiple rooms, and they'd connect them all together.
Nice.
I didn't get the chance to play with the data processing, so I can't comment on that. I hope that I do get to before too long. But the data collection, there was, it's not unlike using the total station or the GNSS receiver, in that it's mostly, what buttons you press at what time, what's the order of doing things, what are the best practices, and then you go. So the one that we used was a GeoSlam Zeb Horizon. And it says Zeb right on the side, which I thought was terribly unfortunate because that's mighty close to the Arabic word for penis. And I thought it was... maybe not appropriate for me to be walking around holding my Zeb in my hand.
Nice.
They'd used this for a number of years, and apparently I was the first person to notice this. So maybe that says something more about me than about anybody else or about the company name. But anyhow, it was great. So it works for about 20 minutes at a run before it starts getting too hot. And that was for this particular one, and it's a few years old. That's really the limiting factor, is the heat that it generates while it's catching all these points. And it's, it's handheld, looks kind of like one of those guns that you use for packing tape, and a sling bag that's got a battery and data collector on it, and connected by a wire to that handheld bit that has this spinning laser beam shooter outer thing on the end of it. That's a technical term. And it takes tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of points, and then those get stitched back together into models. We did use, again, that GNSS receiver as a total station, I think just a GNSS receiver, to lay down some control points outside that we set up tripods over with a special kind of target. In this case, it was a styrofoam ball. So after you're done scanning the room or the rooms, we did, a dozen rooms or so in the 20 minutes, you head out to where you have those control points set up and you scan in those balls, and then you know exactly where the other scans live in space because you've got 3 other points that are spatially referenced to correct those initial 3. And so that was an interesting process, and it was, again, fun because it was bringing in imaging techniques, but also bringing in the surveying techniques that are my lifeblood.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not cheap though. That one that we had cost $40,000 plus.
Oh my God.
So, it may be a case of once you've spent that money, you look for any excuse to use that equipment. But I do see it being extremely useful for anybody that has to do things that are inside of places, right? Inside of buildings, inside of caves in particular. I think that something like this would be incredibly helpful for full documentation of the site.
Yeah, I'm just looking on their website, and some of the images they've got is, just like demo images, look very, very impressive. One of them is colored. It's like a building that has coloration to it. I would imagine that has to be added in post, though, right? The thing is not actually recording that information. It's just distance and plotting a point map, I would assume, right?
Well, I've got some news for you. There's a digital camera connected to the front of this this scanner thing that's taking a video the entire time, and somehow gets merged into the into the final product. Again, because I didn't do any of the processing, I don't know how that's done, and I really hope to learn that. But it brings in colors in some manner. It might just be coloring the individual points of the point cloud, or it might be using it to stitch together a texture map. I honestly don't know. But it's a tool. It's a tool that is going to be seeing increasing use, I'm sure, over the next few years.
Awesome. Well, that's pretty awesome. All right. Well, let's take our final break and come back and wrap up this tech discussion on the other side. Back in a minute.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Welcome back to episode 202 of the ArchaeoTech podcast. And we are wrapping up this discussion with Paul about his time the last couple of months in Saudi Arabia and all the fun tech stuff they got to use. And not just because they have it. Well, sometimes it's because you have it, but also because it really maximizes your time out there and brings back the kind of data that you can really do something with without having to go back and back and back, something like that. It's not like doing archaeology out here, even here in Nevada, I'm in California, but anywhere around here, it's so big, you got to drive 5 hours if you forgot to do something round trip just to go do something else. But like, how often can you fly back to, Saudi Arabia and say, oh, we forgot to do this, so do as much as you can. And then hopefully that's enough, right? Along those lines, photogrammetry, along with laser scanning, you're also doing photogrammetry. So it almost seems like the photogrammetry is, almost not necessary if you're going to the laser scanning route. Like, what's the reason for doing both of them? Did you use them for different things?
In the village documentation, we use them for the same thing.
Okay.
But I also use photogrammetry with those burials, and we use it in other cases too. So, they're complementary. I think that in some ways it's kind of like taking photographs and drawing, right? Mm-hmm. Even though these are both fully digital techniques as opposed to, photography and hand drawing. It just doesn't hurt to take that extra day. And none of it takes a whole lot of time either. I mean, the photogrammetry for a burial, I'd take a couple hundred photos, 150 maybe, and then spend, maybe 2 hours max, absolute max, processing the grave afterwards. And a lot of that was me learning. I think it's really funny, actually. A couple of years ago, we had an episode talking about structure for motion. And to me, it was brand new at the time. And I'm a little scared to listen to that episode again, because I'm sure I said a lot of really silly, naive stuff. And here I spent a lot of time working with Agisoft Metashape, processing photogrammetry, the stuff from the burials and the stuff from the village, and, got to be pretty comfortable with it.
Nice.
I've used other photogrammetry programs too. I've got on my computer here, I've got WebODM, which I've used for drone mapping, and I've also used for building some models of a privy. Pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah.
And some testing and so on. But, each program has its own strengths and weaknesses. Metashape, if anything, it's way, way, way too deep, kind of in that thing of, I was saying earlier about what you need to show the user and what you don't need to show them. The terminology isn't always the same through things. Mm-hmm. It's a little funky, but I think that once you've settled on a particular workflow as being the best, or at least the good enoughest, you run with that.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. We tried a whole bunch of different things, and then we figured out a way that we could really easily get our buildings aligned to the world, and then, bring in the other photos that didn't align themselves perfectly the first few times, get 90+% of the photos to align, and run through the processing to whatever point we had to get to. So, that was fun. That was interesting. I definitely am much more experienced with it. I still have no idea what all the different settings in Metashape allow me to do, how they improve the final product, how they don't improve the final product, how they take extra time or make things go faster. No real knowledge of that. I just know that I had a workflow that was very consistent, and it took me a bit of experimenting to get to that point. That was fun. It was interesting to actually feel like to get a deep dive into that in a way that I hadn't before. And part of that, and I'll touch on this a little bit, is that, when we're taking those hundreds of photos, we couldn't upload all that. Our internet connection is through SIM cards, through Wi-Fi hotspots. Right. So, trying to upload gigs and gigs of data would just never work. Mm-hmm. So we were instead stuck with having to process things to a certain point locally. So that way, if somebody back home wanted to finish the processing for the report, for example, they didn't have to get, those hundreds and hundreds of photographs. They could just get, a farther along down the road, step of the process. And hopefully that's a lot less data.
So along those lines, I mean, you're talking about a lot of things that you guys were doing that is just generating like mountains and mountains of data. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you did have the ability to, maybe send this off and upload it to the mothership, was that part of the data storage strategy, or there were just like also mountains of hard drives out there where you were storing everything as well?
Yeah, so there are mountains of hard drives, which makes me kind of nervous. There are also a couple QNAP servers, an older one that they had decommissioned but still had online because they're afraid to fully decommission,
Sure.
which I've seen in companies and places before where you have some software or some piece of hardware that, I don't know, somebody might still be using it. And so it never gets turned offline. And so they end up being zombies. We also had another QNAP server that we were actively using, and that's where all our data went for the photogrammetry, as well as other things. A lot of the GIS went there. GIS data shapefiles aren't particularly big, but the photos, especially those DSLR photos, a lot of that stuff would live locally. We didn't yet have a systematized way for uploading things to the mothership, and that's something that I really want to start thinking about, because this is going to directly affect me in Lagash, where we also generate mountains and mountains of data, and we also have a very bad internet connection. So what I ended up doing actually is I was really impressed with using that local file server and having, I mean, it's very old school now, but having all our computers there in the office on Ethernet talking to that same file. Well, not all of them, just the ones that had the huge amounts of data, like the one that had to process the photogrammetry. The other ones could do it via Wi-Fi, no problem. But I've been bumping up against the storage space of my own projects and things I've been doing for myself, and moving some things off of my computer onto hard drives using iCloud, so I have access to things on the go, but it might not be loaded, so I still need an internet connection to download them. I've been wrestling with this for a while. I also cull data, right? So there's things that, a part of a project, and at a certain point I'm like, I don't need that anymore, these antecedents to whatever I'm producing. But I decided that I wanted to try a different tack. So I got myself a server here too at home. I just installed it. Still configuring it today. Just the parts all arrived the other day. I was initially going to get a QNAP because of my good initial first experience.
Yeah.
I was going to get a 4-drive one and then RAID 5. So I'd have, if I did 4 terabyte drives, I'd have 12 terabytes to work with. In the end, I went with a 2-drive Synology one. Just kind of like the looks of its software better. And so I got 2 8-terabyte drives, and they're mirrored. So if one of them dies, the other one will continue going. And that gives me 8 terabytes to play with. And that's well more than enough room for any of the projects I do. And then I can start to consolidate these disparate hard drives I've had onto this. I still have to come up with a good strategy for how I deal with this long term. And it makes me a little nervous that I don't have, a cloud backup at the moment if I'm using this, but I'll cross that bridge. Anyhow, the whole point of this is that, all that data that we were generating gave me a little experience in how to sync things back up to the mothership, and made me think about how I manage my own data. And so I'm going to be using that to experiment with. I mean, it cost me a few $100, $650 roughly, for the Synology DS220 Plus and those 2 8 terabyte drives. But I think that at the end of it, I'll have a much better sense of how an archaeological project can really manage that data, get the things that need to be, put into, shared server space on Dropbox or Box or Ignite or any Google Drive or whatever the project as a whole is using, where multiple people can access them, and how it can also have those antecedent data types, the photographs I use in photogrammetry, for example, live locally so they can be worked on quickly, but don't have to in the end be uploaded. That stuff, when you're done with it, can be archived, can be put on a couple hard drives, put in a couple places, and be done with. So, this is a work in progress. This is going to be an experiment, a long-term experiment, but putting my money where my mouth is here, and I want to see how this actually plays out.
Nice. Cool. Well, a couple of more things to talk about here. You mentioned iPhone LiDAR scanning, which came out on the iPhone a few years ago, but did you actually get to use it here, or were you just kind of playing with your own iPhone out there?
Well, that's funny because I was playing with my own iPhone. I also have an iPhone 12 Pro. I bought it just before the 13 came out. I mean, like a week before the 13 came out, because my other phone died. I initially bought the 12, which I liked the color of better than the 12 Pro. The blue I thought was really nice. Got it home and realized it didn't have the LiDAR. And so then took it back to the Apple store the next day and said, whoops, bought the wrong model. And I've played with the LiDAR in the past a few times. I downloaded a whole bunch of different programs and tested them out, and they all had their strengths and weaknesses. I ended up culling it down to just one program called Polycam, one app called Polycam, which also exists for Android, and then continued to not use it because I didn't have any call for it. It was just a toy. Well, this time on the burials, I actually did scans of the burials. And, you said you forgot to do this. There are a couple places I forgot to take measurements.
Oh, yeah.
Fortunately, the burials were all in the same area. The soils were exactly the same. The depth of the top layer was, a little thicker in some places, a little thinner in others, but generally around, 40 to 60 centimeters. And the maximum depth was 60 centimeters to just over a meter, depending on how far down we went in any particular trench. But I failed to take the proper measurements everywhere. So what I did is I went and I scanned. Well, I didn't know that I failed to take them, but unfortunately I had scanned these burials beforehand. And this was what was absolutely amazing to me. I'm doing the photogrammetry with Metashape, and it's making beautiful georeferenced images, orthomosaics that I bring right into my GIS and overlay on the plan of the area. But with Polycam, I just go and spend maybe a minute scanning a burial. Nice. Another minute and a half as it processes. And suddenly I've got that 3D model right there on the phone. I can take measurements on that 3D model.
Nice.
I took certain measurements, to see how accurate it was. I had certain things I measured in real world with tape.
Yeah.
And I compared that against what I measured with in the Polycam model. They were the same. So that meant that I could trust the depths that I forgot to take. And so as I was tidying up my notes last week, I relied on those Polycam models a lot, and you can really see that the detail isn't as good as what I was getting with Metashape, but it is really phenomenally good regardless. And that it takes just a few minutes. This is absolutely 100% going to be in my toolkit here on out. And I think I have to pay for the full version of the program so I can export my OBJ files. It just, and share them with other people if they need to look at them. I can't see why one would not be using this.
That's awesome. It's I just downloaded it actually. I can't believe I hadn't downloaded it before, because I think you have talked about this when we first talked about LiDAR on the iPhones. But I never really had a strictly good use case for it, and I probably still don't, but it's kind of fun, and I'm definitely going to play around with it. But
yeah, I mean, somebody like you that mostly does survey, I don't know how helpful it would be on survey.
Sure.
There may be if you find some interesting feature, right? So I could see myself using it if I'm surveying in Arabia and I come across a somewhat unusual cairn, for example.
Yeah.
I could definitely see myself scanning that cairn just so I've got another record of it. It doesn't take very long. The detail is much better than what you'd expect, and it allows you to spin things around and look at things and measure things. So again, forgot to do this. Whoops, I forgot to measure the diameter of that cairn. Well, now I can just, my choices are either say it's about 2.5 meters, or I can measure it and say, oh yeah, it's 2 meters 60.
Nice. So wrapping this segment up, there's a lot of stuff on here that we've talked about, but I didn't see one mention of drones. Did you guys not have them out there, or was it regulatory? What's going on there?
It's regulatory.
Okay, so that's what I figured.
They have them. They use them for a variety of projects. Some of the projects I was on, but they just did not use them in the phase that I was there. So, we'll see what else gets done. But that's, it's a regular tool in the toolkit to get some nice drone orthomosaics that you can then use in your GIS. You can use them for the planning, whether it's excavation or conservation or, mitigation, whatever's going on. That drone imagery really helps. We just, like I said, didn't generate any new drone imagery when I was there. And that was regulatory. That was because they needed specific permits for specific projects. And those hadn't come through while I was in the field.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I also sensed that our audience was getting thirsty, so I had to say it right here at the end. So
Thank you.
Indeed. All right. So we just have a couple minutes left, and I see one last little bullet point down here that says bonus Acheulean hand axes. Let's hear about that.
Yeah. Okay, so this is where I'm going to get in trouble if I talk about this too much, but I'm going to say, holy cow, we found Acheulean hand axes. Well, by we, I mean
awesome.
other people on the project. I was not on the survey at the time, but we found at least a half dozen. And then I went out there when we measured them in with the GNSS receivers. So we have exact, precise locations on them, and helped with the photography of them in situ and bagging them up and bringing them back into the lab so they can be studied. But this was around a relic lake bed, and it's phenomenal to find something that old and so many of them. I mean, this is clearly a site around this old lake bed.
Yeah. I mean, that's got to be pretty top of your list of some of the oldest things you've ever seen in the field, if not the oldest.
But
think hard to say, though.
The oldest.
Maybe around Lagash?
No, nothing like that. Nothing that old.
Nothing like that. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Lagash would have been underwater, I believe, back then.
Yeah, I suppose so. All right. Well, this has been great, Paul. I'm glad to have you back. It's awesome to keep this going. Do you got any plans for the summer where you're going to be out, at least out of the country?
Actually, I'm going to be out of the country later this week. Actually, tomorrow. So by the time you hear this, I'm probably out of the country. I'm going to Copenhagen for the ICANA conference. That's the International Congress on the Archaeology of the Ancient Near East. And we have a workshop there on the site of Lagash. So I'll be giving a little talk, and yeah, that'll be interesting.
Yeah,
we'll see. Most of the most interesting talks are going to be before I arrive, of course, and then other ones I really want to go to, as is typical for conferences, conflict with each other.
Of course,
but I'll make the best out of it.
Okay, cool. Well, again, we look forward to a lot more good podcasts this summer. And man, if we can get this going, we've failed for various technological reasons twice in a row, but I am really hoping that our episode after this is with Paul Martin, who was mentioned on the episode about doing the Louisiana archaeology a few months ago, and he was the one that brought out the dogs that he used for finding some of the things they found there. So we just had some real logistical issues, and we're going to try one more time to get this recorded. So I really hope we can bring that, because it sounds like it's going to be an interesting interview. So, all right. Well, with that, thanks everybody. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, and thanks again, Paul.
Thanks, Chris. Take care. Thanks for listening to the ArchaeoTech podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.archpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at archpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off-Road and is licensed free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
.com.